Hi, I'm Ashley Lawrence. I play Kirsty.
Hi, I'm Pete Atkins. I wrote the movie.
And I'm Tony Randall, the director.
What's your pleasure, sir?
Jesus wept.
And that was Andy Robinson. This is actually a montage of scenes from the first movie, right, Tony?
Yes, I guess the idea was to get right into the mood of the film and scare people or gross people, whatever worked.
Right. Whatever would set them up.
Now, interestingly enough, if you look at the female Cenobite, it's a different actress in the second film. And she actually looks considerably different.
Right. Grace Kirby in the first one, Barbie Wilde in the second, right?
Right.
Yeah, well done, Ash.
Thanks.
Well, there's one that won't be bothering us anymore.
That's right.
No, don't do that.
That's Doug Bradley.
Now, if you notice in this montage, there's a moment where Doug rises up behind Kirsty. And one of the funniest moments I ever had on a movie set was on the set of Hellraiser when Doug was on a teeter-totter being risen up, and he was brought up and there was a technical problem, and everybody started solving the technical problem, and then Doug started to fall over, ending up on his face.
Did it drive the pins further in?
I don't think so.
And the music we're hearing here is by Chris Young, and in my perhaps not entirely unbiased opinion, one of the greatest horror film scores of the last 25 years. Been ripped off by many another composer since then.
Well, I saw it in print that the Batman score done about a year later was very similar.
Mm. And Chris had scored Hellraiser as well. There's his name
There
now.
it is. Yay.
God bless you. And a lot of the names in the credits you see in here are English people, because this movie, like the first one, was
Yay.
actually shot in England. Yay!
Except for me. I was
Well-
born in Los Angeles. Now, you notice how the title recedes? That was actually done with a camera on a track pulling away from a title card, which is probably the last time in film history it was done that way.
It really was done
It
that
was
way?
done that
I
way.
didn't know that.
This is the face of a shortwave receiver, and the reason it's there is because for my entire life I've had an absolute fascination with radio and shortwave. And if you can read Morse code, there's a hidden message in the Morse code that you're hearing here. The hidden message also appears in 3 other of my films. I probably said that the last time I did this commentary, but it's in my life I've actually had one person find me and call me and say, and had got the message.
So this is Doug Bradley in what will turn out to be a flashback sequence on a set at Pinewood Studios outside London in England. Although I didn't name him in this script, this character who's going to go on to become Pinhead was expanded a little in Hellraiser 3, which initially Tony also worked on with me. He later became known as Elliot Spencer, and this is Elliot Spencer's moment of truth.
All of this backstory was created for this film.
That's a great effect.
Those are 8 grips somehow managing to be in synchronization, pulling up shades.
Well, they're all ex-British Army, you know.
That was a really giant box, wasn't it?
Yes, it was about a foot square for that one shot.
Doug, by the way, is also from Liverpool, the town I'm from, the town Clive Barker's from as well. And the three of us first worked together in the mid-1970s in a theatre company, first in Liverpool, then in London. So it's great to see Doug become a monster icon.
Many of these effects, the driving and the nails, were done with just very simply with reverse cameras. Also, the chains emerging from the box is the chains actually being pulled back into the box run in reverse. Simple but effective.
The sweet suffering.
Very difficult shot here.
That was great, though.
And whose eye is this?
That would be mine.
This is a zoom lens and a dolly back, which is very difficult to maintain focus on. And it took us about an hour and a half to do this shot, as I remember.
And Robin was the DP and Dave Worley was the operator?
David Worley, yes. We're on a sound stage in Pinewood Studios. Wasn't he Gold Leader in Star Wars?
This man?
Yeah.
Runson?
Yeah. If you look at the original Star Wars, he's like Gold Leader in the dogfight scene.
Psychiatric.
Remember? You and your boyfriend?
Steve.
Don't worry about him. He's okay. We sent him home hours ago.
I called him Ronson, by the way, because there was another detective in another movie called Gillette. So I just thought, well, one razor's as good as another. That's totally true. That's I stole the name.
Father's house.
This shot was taken from the original film. We didn't go back and reshoot it for this one.
So that's the house in Cricklewood, right?
Now, I heard that someone killed themselves in that house.
Oh, yeah, those stories. And 17 people died on the set of The Exorcist,
There's a bit of reshooting in this scene. I looked at the dailies the first morning and thought I could go back and make it better, and shot an additional shot. It's coming up. That was the first day of shooting. And this was the second day.
No.
And that's probably the moment when we realized that although it was shot in England, the movie is set in America because the policeman has a gun.
Which, of course, confused everybody, and I've been criticized for years because of it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't exactly Billy Club the thing to death.
Well, actually, less criticized than the first movie, right? Because in the first movie, the accents are dubbed into American, which is odd, or at least
Right.
you cast accordingly in this one.
I'm sorry,
Hey, you look good through rain.
Thanks.
Of course, the rain is created by a Hudson sprayer and an art department person right above camera.
Right above, yeah.
Yes.
Kusich, sir. We just found another one, though it suffered a little accidental damage.
Now, as an actor, you're trying to be in a heightened emotional state there, and there's a guy above you spraying the window. How easy, how difficult is it for actors to just forget that stuff?
I think it depends on the circumstance, but ideally they could drive a semi past and you wouldn't notice because you're dealing with whatever the story is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, in horror film tradition, there's always the monster that stays dead but will become alive again for the sequel, and our method was in the mattress. And if you can't tell by that zoom, slow dolly in, you'll know later.
It's usually a clue.
Now, this scene was actually inspired by watching Ben Casey when I was probably too young to be watching Ben Casey, and remembering a brain surgery sequence in dark black and white with Vince Edwards performing brain surgery on a patient that was conscious. And that's where this all came from.
I like that piece of flesh just kind of
Just
strung up there. Yeah.
stretched, yeah. And this is our human villain for this story, Dr. Chenard, played by Ken Cranham.
Final solution. We have to see. We have to know.
Dr. Chenard, the new arrival is
The monologue you're hearing from him was rewritten in post-production because handily Ken was wearing a surgeon's mask.
And also, the name Chenard is a combination of Christian Barnard, the doctor that performed the world's first heart transplant.
Right. Because I'd called this guy Malahide in my original script. He'd been called Malahide. And Tony changed the name. That was our first meeting. And I thought, ugh, this doesn't go very well. What else is this guy going to screw with?
Is the wheelchair guy coming up, or is he later?
He's later.
Oh.
55 years and he still doesn't know my name?
Oh. You have a drawing of him, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
That you did.
Well, yeah.
That Ashley did, right?
Still have it.
Their story and take from them their pain.
That was fun.
I remember you were bleeding after this.
Yeah, I was.
So it was real glass, not candy glass?
I think she surprised everybody with what happened.
By managing to cut herself with candy glass.
And there wasn't, I don't
Now
think
that's
No,
there
there
method,
wasn't
baby.
there wasn't a breaking thing.
there wasn't candy glass. I think it just happened.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Chenard,
Ronson.
my assistant, Carl McRae, and this must be Kirsty.
And, you mentioned Star Wars, Tony, and Bill Hope here was in Aliens.
Right.
Bill Hope plays Kyle, the younger doctor, who'll be involved with Kirsty, the character Ashley plays, in the machinations of the plot.
Kirsty, Dr. Chenard will be taking care of you from now on. Maybe we can talk tomorrow. Okay?
Wait. That mattress, you've got to destroy that mattress. See, Julia died on it, and she can come back now like Frank.
I have to say that Kenneth Cranham, who plays Dr. Chenard, is one of my favorite actors I've ever worked with, as well as Ashley Lawrence, of course. But he was a very interesting actor. A lot of stuff going on behind his eyes, and in some way he quite related to this character, although he probably would have never admitted it.
No, he was doing it for the mortgage, love, wasn't he?
Right.
That was his line.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an enthusiast for the horror genre, but nevertheless,
He enjoyed it.
pro.
Embraced it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Kyle McRae. Call me Kyle.
That cop didn't believe me.
Maybe not, but that doesn't mean you're not telling the truth.
I'm sorry, Kirsty. I have to attend to one of my patients. Kyle will give you something to help you sleep. We shall speak tomorrow.
Exterior Pinewood Studios, which you've probably seen in dozens and dozens of films, including The Great Gatsby.
And the optical above that, was that one of Cliff Culley's? Yeah.
Who I imagine is retired now. However, he has done films dating back to Sink the Bismarck and many, many others.
He worked with Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, based out of Pinewood. And again, this is a really nice theme
Yeah,
from
haunting.
Chris Young. Yeah.
Haunting music that he did.
This is Ashley meeting the second female lead,
Imogen Borman.
Imogen Borman. No relation to John Borman, the director, despite Tony's nervousness that John might show up on set and tell him where to point the camera.
Sad, huh? She's been here 6 months. She's a complete mystery. No family, no visitors. She's completely alone. The nurse named her Tiffany.
What's her real name?
She never speaks. All she does is solve puzzles.
Why puzzles?
We don't know. But Dr. Chenard thinks it might be a good thing. Maybe beneath her withdrawal, she's putting something in order.
We're opening doors.
Oh, ominous line.
Doesn't matter.
Anyway, let's concentrate on you for the moment. I want you to take a couple of these.
Was there a significance to room 107?
Can't remember that one.
Hmm.
I mean, we did bury several in-jokes and gags throughout the movie, mainly based on Jerry Lewis's telethon.
Which we were watching. But
which we were watching several tapes of. A friend of ours had made a telethon's greatest hits, basically the moments when Jerry was meanest to his staff. So a couple of the lines, some throwaway lines of dialogue, which were added in much later drafts when I was over here in America working with Tony on it. 105 years and he still doesn't know my name, just to mix up with the cards. So if you're a real Hellraiser completist, you probably need to go out and check out all the telethon tapes to catch these things.
You'd think I would have caught on to not sleep too much in hospital rooms.
Well, you know, poor Kirsty. I mean, this is literally hours after the events of the first movie, so it's not like you'd had time to gather your senses.
To figure it out, yeah. Break bad habits.
Now, if you notice, there's going to be a camera move here that crosses the stage line. This was actually done to repair a mistake I had made. Here we go. We're going to cross. Now she's looking left to right because I had crossed the line earlier in the scene and had to make it back. And thankfully, Dave Worley figured out how to fix my mistake.
God bless him. You should probably explain what crossing the line means, Tony.
Well, it's basically keeping eyes looking the correct direction. Mm-hmm. Somebody's looking left, the other person should be looking right. My understanding of that was limited in the early days.
This was your first feature?
Yes, first feature.
Mine too. In fact, Ashley was the old pro of us, having done the first one.
I must say that the putting the blood to the lips was actually the cameraman's idea.
Tony, you keep saying that every time we do these commentaries. It was in my first draft, believe me. Of course, that might mean that Robin was paying attention to the script and you weren't, but...
Well, I've read reviews that said I wasn't paying attention to the script, so...
Well, I've read reviews that said the script was not worth paying attention to.
Good. Pleasant day. Pleasant day.
Oh, that's Steve.
All right, twitching patient with headgear is our friend Steve Montiglio.
I also want to state that this sequence predates Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
So take that for what it's worth.
Now, there's some interesting casting choices in these crazy cameos, Tony, right?
Yes, I believe, I don't remember who he was.
Well, he was an actor.
Yes.
But I think
coming up,
this one?
That's the accountant.
It's April 15th.
That was the accountant on the show. What was this chap's name?
Oliver. He's the same guy who played Skinless Frank, is that correct?
Skinless Frank, yeah.
Oh, right. That's right.
Kirsty, you all right?
I had a visitor.
Now, the artificial sort of sound-stagey look here is actually intentional, giving the film kind of an otherworldly quality, which was kind of the theme of the first two.
Kirsty, your father's dead.
My father's dead, and he's alone, and he's still suffering.
Dr. Chenard, I'll get Dr. Chenard. You take it easy. I'm sure he can help.
That shot from behind her is actually one of my favorite little bits.
The opening shot of the sequence with the window above.
The window.
Yeah, it's nice.
Back to the camera. You saw the scene ended with a slow push into her face, a technique I probably used far too much in this film. See, there it is again. Oh.
But techniques like that are very interesting because they're usually invisible to the audience,
right,
because they're not too showy, but it says that something important is happening inside the character.
Right.
I just didn't want them thinking you were doing it to amuse yourself, Tone.
Dr. Chenard?
This all must have been going on forever.
Kirsty?
The part I know about. The part that destroyed my family. That must have
Well, here
destroyed
I've actually
You're
changed
reversing it.
I'm
Yeah, what does that mean?
It was him.
Now, some of these sequences, the wedding, are outtakes from the first film that were never used.
It was Frank and Julia.
And you notice there was a little jump in there because I think the negative cutter destroyed part of the negative, if I recall correctly.
Really?
But that could be incorrect, so don't want to hear from any
Yeah,
lawyers
don't want
about
litigation
that.
about that. You ruined my client's career.
But there's more. There was the box. It was a
Now, oftentimes people have asked me about these puzzle boxes and how they worked, and they were basically manipulated from underneath, and there were 4 or 5 of them to create each individual movement. There was never a functioning box that did everything.
I know, and people are very disappointed about that.
What, that each is in like a various stage of unrest kind of thing, and it doesn't.
Well, that it doesn't
Yeah,
really
no,
exist.
yeah, exactly. I've been asked at conventions stuff, but but how do I get a working one?
Oh,
Now, whether they
that's
whether
a
they
little
mean one that'll
disturbing.
actually open the doors to hell or just move around and make pretty motions, I'm not entirely sure.
It was Julia. That bitch. She brought him men to make him stronger. So she could have him again.
Kirsty, it's Frank. It's Uncle Frank.
No.
You remember? Come to Daddy.
Get the fuck off of me!
Now, he was looped. This is one of the actors that had the American accent placed in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall who did the voice, but it was not Sean Chapman who ended up doing his own accent in the second film.
Right, in the second film it was Sean.
That's right.
Right.
It was Sean.
Oh, God. They'd murdered him. Frank and Julia. They'd taken his skin and given it to Frank.
Come to Daddy.
Frank betrayed her and left her to the Cenobites.
It's nothing personal, baby.
She died on that mattress, and the Cenobites came.
It's interesting to me, just in retrospect, because, this movie is now 13 years old, that we all collectively felt the need to tell that much of the story of the first movie in the middle of the second one. And it seems to me, as sequels have proliferated over the years between then and now, that sort of retelling is not deemed as necessary these days.
I think in this particular film, it's so much not a standalone. It really follows the other
Right.
one, that if you don't know the backstory very well, don't know the players, I don't think the story makes sense. I think you have to have it.
And I read a lot of reviews that said it didn't make sense anyway, so...
Well, there's 2 schools of thought.
About reviews or about
making
sense?
sense. This film has gotten terrible criticism and wonderful praise.
I felt very old. About a year ago, I was in on a pitch at, I think at Silver Pictures. A young guy working there came over to me and said, "Oh, I love Hellbound. I love those old classics." And, he was probably 9 years old when he saw it.
Right. This set was called the Obsession Room. As you can see, there's pieces of artifacts from his obsession with the occult. The room was built on a 4-foot rostrum, allowing the effects people to get underneath it to be able to manipulate the box, which you'll be seeing later on in the film.
And is that also where is that with a mattress, where they had to pump stuff through the mattress, or is that a different
It's
set?
the same set.
Uh-huh.
Same set.
Yeah.
And I believe this was Studio C at Pinewood.
Young Cal beginning to suspect that all is not well with his mentor, Dr. Chenard.
There were some really disgusting things in those jars.
Well, this was the brainchild of Mike Buchanan, the production designer, and he became quite obsessed with this room. You see the light there on the desk, and there's a white piece of paper glowing? That is actually a page from the script that Robin Vigeon, the cameraman, put there to create that effect. Now, the steam coming out on these pipes was actually created by the same person who created the steam for Elephant Man.
Ah.
Thus the similarity of look. And his machine managed to malfunction and blow steam on my leg one day, which was quite fun.
That was your second most interesting accident on set, right? The first being the glass of water that wasn't?
Yeah.
Tony is a teetotaler, or was a teetotaler. And there was a young PA, production assistant called Gavin, I believe, nice guy, who Tony needed a glass of water when he was shooting. And Gavin ran off to the refrigerator and opened it and saw a glass of what appeared to be water. So rather than pour a new one, he brought the glass of water to Tony, who threw it down in one.
With a vitamin.
With yeah.
Vodka. And I stumbled around the rest of the day, probably some of my best work on the show.
What is he doing? What is this?
Come, Mr. Brown.
Now, this entire sequence was very controversial in terms of getting the rating for the United States. In the theatrical version, this particular scene hardly survived. It had to be cut so severely to get the rating. In all subsequent video releases, it is intact. I believe the video is not rated. And I think that seeing the edited version is quite rare.
Yeah, I think that's true, although not all video releases. It was originally released, both versions, right?
80% not rated, 20% rated.
All succeeding editions after the first one, yeah.
Or rated.
Right.
I have not seen a rated version of this film in years.
I remember people walking out of the dailies of this, though, because it was so disturbing.
I nearly walked out of the dailies of this. And actually, there's something in here that was Robin's idea. Although the sequence is obviously straight from the script, I believe it was Robin Vigeon who said, shouldn't he run it across his groin,
yes.
Tone?
That's when everyone just lost it. Oh.
It's all rubber, folks, all plastic. The actor is feeling no pain.
No actors have been harmed in the making of this film.
Except psychologically.
Well, yes.
Now, to help you, take yourself out of the scene for a moment, when Julia comes out of the mattress, which I hope doesn't give it away for anybody at this moment, Chenard is hit in the face with splattering blood, and that was actually a one-shot me with a squirt gun. Managed to hit the target.
Good angle, yeah, it's good.
Sitting right below the camera and shot him with the gun.
I think the groin shot is coming up now. Yeah, thanks, Robin.
Oh, God.
Well, at least you notice that Chenard appropriately turned away at that moment.
Right, well, the man needs some privacy, doesn't he? But yeah, there's a lot of life in that face. He's fascinated by this.
And here we go. Boom. Squirt gun.
That was good.
And this is a reverse camera. The actress had to begin the scene up and then sunk back down, closing her eyes.
Right, and that gives a really eerie feel to the way she opens them. And it's such a startling contrast anyway, that actress's blue eyes against all that red. And again, as with Frank, this is not Claire Higgins in the Skinless Skin. This is another actress who was thin enough that when the skinless suit was on her, she would be approximately the size that Claire would be if we'd skinned her. That was the theory, right?
Right.
And we never got Kirsty to go skinless, did we, Ash? That was a shame.
No, but I got to wear a skin.
Oh, that's
so I was
right,
doubly skinned.
Right.
And that was a insert we shot later.
Because people thought it wasn't unpleasant
Yeah,
enough.
I guess it was.
And Chris Figg was doing second unit for you, or?
Yes.
Chris Figg, who was the English producer of the movie, shot second unit for Tony. Well, talk about painting the screen red.
Hey, but how about that aim?
Yeah, I'm impressed. I thought they would have hired a professional to do that, Tom.
Yeah.
But Kirsty could have ended up skinless. I mean, I'm sure in one universe, Hellraiser 3 would actually have been the consummation of the romance between Kirsty and Pinhead. Yeah.
I think it's on the internet.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. I mean, some of the fan fiction that, in magazines like Cenobium and stuff. What's wrong with those people?
And just to date this, none of us had ever heard of the internet when we were making this film.
That's correct.
It wasn't a gleam in anybody's eye except for the Defense Department.
That's right. In fact, never mind the internet, I wrote the first draft of this on a manual typewriter. And the first time I ever used a computer was when I met Tony, when he'd been brought on to direct it. And he said, "Could you do the next draft on my computer?" And I was very frightened. But you guided me through, Tony, and I appreciate it. That was an old... It wasn't a K-Pro. It was a compact.
Corona computer. Script written. The 6th floor of... the first draft was which hotel?
The first draft...
And you wrote with a manual?
I wrote with a manual typewriter in a... Well, Chris Figg had put me in a very nice hotel in Swiss Cottage and then decided that was far too expensive for the likes of me. So he moved me to a pretty nice hotel in Hampstead. But when they brought me back down for the second draft and flew you over, you were in the Kensington Palace? Or I was in the Kensington Palace and you were... Meridian, that's right. Because you still had an expense account as a former New World executive.
Lovely hotel, wonderful afternoon teas every day.
Yeah, it was great. We had a great time working on that draft.
Now, we had an interesting set visitor this day. Director Ken Russell visited and was watching some of the shooting here, as I recall. He had just done a film with the production designer, and the designer had invited him to view his sets and all of this strange imagery.
Which one did Mike do for him? Lure of the White Worm? Or
he did a couple.
Uh-huh.
I think he did that. I did the one with Shelley and Byron. What was that?
Gothic?
Yes, Gothic.
I'm cold.
course, we would never have an actor smoking today, God forbid.
Especially an actor playing a doctor.
Yeah.
Well, I continue to write smoking scenes into my scripts.
Rebel.
But politically correct directors and producers take them out. Moral cowards that they are.
Well, I recently did a show for Fox Network where I had a character smoking, and it was a big deal to have it approved.
Really?
Yeah. Smoking cigars, and it was a period piece.
There are some genuinely bizarre images in this movie. Skinless woman in a white linen suit, sipping Chardonnay, stealing a drag from her new boyfriend's cigarette.
Right. Also, the heater on the floor was used in a George Michael music video after this. English rock star. The same prop was used. Noticed it on MTV a year later.
I thought you stole one of those heaters. Or you wanted to.
Just don't look in my garage.
Yeah, right.
She has a lovely spine.
Yeah. Sculpted by Little John, that particular suit. I mean, it was Bob Keen's and Jeff Portis's Image Animation did most of the effects work. I think the specific sculptor on that suit was Little John. Yeah. If I'm wrong and it was one of you other guys, forgive me. You're all brilliant.
There.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Well,
speaking of prop survivals, the very same radio that you saw in the opening sequence that Tony talked about, when we were shooting Hellraiser 3 in North Carolina, the production designer Steve Hardy, who'd worked on this movie with Bob Keen, but was production designer for number 3, ordered a radio to match, because we were shooting more of the backstory of Elliot Spencer. And he ordered it from a prop house in New England, and the same radio showed up, which he had not tried to get. He thought that was impossible, because it came from a massive prop house. So the same radio is in both movies.
There was a 360-degree dolly there.
I'm sorry I talked through it, Tom.
All right.
Tell him about it now while he lifts her dress.
It's just complicated. A lot of lighting changes that are invisible.
Now, oddly, it was the kiss, not this moment, that elicited the most groans in the theatre when I first saw it in the theatre.
Yeah. A lot of controversy about this line of dialogue, now all we need is skin. Because unbeknownst to me, skin means condom in England.
So people kept telling me.
Yeah.
I had never heard that used at all.
Nor had I, but...
it was Claire, in fact, wasn't it?
Yes.
Claire said, we can't say a skin.
now all we need is skin.
I didn't actually realize how difficult it was to get a break in the movie business, because I was very lucky in the sense, as I mentioned earlier, Clive and Doug Bradley and I had all worked together in theatre for several years, back in the 70s through to the early 80s. I'd left the theatre company to go back to Liverpool and form a rock and roll band for a few years, and then I'd started writing fiction, and Clive had written and directed the first Hellraiser, and they were looking to make a sequel, and basically Clive said to Chris Figg, you should talk to this guy, you should read some stuff, and called me. I had dinner with Chris Figg, and it all seemed terribly easy. I want to apologize to every other screenwriter out there who had to write 10 scripts before they got the first one filmed, because I didn't know that it was difficult. Chris seemed to like me over dinner, pitched a version of the story, and I was hired. I think, leaving aside any talent I might or might not have, I think what was actually happening, and it's one of the reasons that these movies were shot in England, is that the pound was spectacularly weak against the dollar at this time, and companies like New World could get a lot more bang for their buck. So they didn't need to police things as much as they might have done. And so I think timing played a great deal in my luck, because Chris Figg basically called New World and said, I found the writer. And they said, okay, pay him. Only afterwards did I realize that it's not always that easy. So, I'm grateful to everybody for opening that particular door for me. I'd like to point out, if I'd been particularly bad, the door would have slammed very rapidly.
And speaking of timing, from a historical standpoint, as far as the money is concerned, this was shot about a month after the stock market crash of 1987. So we had a 20% cut in budget due to the exchange rate. This moment with this exposed woman here is something I would like to say I would never do again, because I think it was shamelessly exploitive for the film. There, I've said it.
Yeah, okay. Well, Tony is now is a family man now. Many kids, lives in the suburbs.
Well, someday I'm actually going to make films that I can show my children, and that's one of my goals.
The kids are almost getting to the age where they can watch this. They'll be out of your hands, Tony. Forget it.
Prior to this, I was a vice president of production at New World. One of my projects at New World was the original Hellraiser, that I was actually brought on mid-production to sort of straighten out a bit. And after working pretty extensively on some reshoots and recutting, I had asked my boss at the time, Steve White and Bob Ramey, bosses, if they wouldn't mind that I leave and direct the sequel. And after a little bit of cajoling, they said yes, and that's how it happened. And before that, I was in visual effects and film editing. So I did have technical background, but virtually no directing experience. And of course, many people would say it shows. But growing up here in Los Angeles, I became quite fond of staying up late at night and watching the horror films, which is the only time you could ever see them. This is the days when video cassettes did not exist. And I saw almost everything in the middle of the night, hidden away somewhere, so nobody would know. I loved horror films, and I always have, and continue to, and it's a genre that I like, and it's a genre I actually like working in. I think it's a lot of fun, and hope to continue it. There's the classic, The Bride of Frankenstein, of course, I think is possibly my favorite, quite like Rosemary's Baby. But also there's certain science fiction films that also influenced me pretty heavily. And one, I think in terms of a mood, a couple of them. One was Invaders from Mars, the original version. I've always was quite affected by that. And another one, which was more of a fantasy film, but it had this very downbeat mood to it, which was actually this anti-war film called The Boy with Green Hair. And although it's not really a horror film, when you see it when you're young, it is horrific. When you actually growing up and finding your body has been altered in some way, and you're looked upon as a freak from that point. And I think that in many ways is a horror film theme. That film has always stuck with me.
Oh yeah, I grew up obsessed with the stuff, both the literature and the movies. And again, in England growing up, it was studying the TV guide to learn when, the one screening of the one horror movie would happen that month and staying up late to see it. I always loved that stuff. I always wanted to do it. I remember very early on in my career, such as it is, an executive said to me, "Well, Pete, we've got to get you out of this horror ghetto." And I like the ghetto. Until the triumph of social realism in the middle of the 19th century, most art, mainstream art, was fantastic in nature. So it's a fine tradition that nobody need be ashamed of working in. And in terms of the movies I like, again, it would be pretty obvious classics. I mean, my two favorite Hollywood fantasy movies are King Kong and Bride of Frankenstein. My other favorite movie is Jean Cocteau's Orphée, or Orpheus. They would be the three movies I would take with me to a desert island, I think. I grew up, obviously, when Hammer was still, not perhaps in its golden period, but its later movies were still playing theatres when I was a kid. And a lot of the earlier ones were reissued on double bills, so I did get to see horror movies, at least in the theatre, quite early on. I remember being strangely impressed as a pubescent 14-year-old by Ingrid Pitt seducing all the other actresses in The Vampire Lovers when Hammer discovered in 1971 that lesbian sex could help sell horror movies. But I remember thinking at the time that, well, everybody seems to think it's cool that Ingrid Pitt is biting on Madeline Smith's breast, but would we think it was as cool if Christopher Lee was sinking his fangs into Peter Cushing's neck? I don't think so.
Kyle? Kyle?
But now, Ashley, you, on the other hand, had no interest in the genre at all,
No,
right? Or...
no, none. None. I'm too easy a sell, I think, with suggestion. I never went to these films at all.
Because they can get under your skin, because they can freak you out.
I guess, yeah. I just was never drawn to them, but I enjoy working on them.
Did working on them rob them of their power over you? Can you now watch other horror movies and not be affected because you think, been there, done that?
Kind of, yeah. I'm pretty good at being able to talk myself down when I'm watching one.
Pretty good at taking a punch, too, apparently.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice scene, that showdown between stepmom and daughter. I remember it was one of my first lessons in you can never be too obvious for certain people, when an executive who shall be nameless, who was supervising a later draft, a rewrite of this, came in and a light bulb went on over his head, and he imparted his genius to me, which he said, Pete, what you got to consider here is the relationship here is it's like a twisted fairy tale. It's like she's the wicked stepmother, and the Christie girl is like Snow White. All of which are lines from the dialogue in the draft he'd read, but like I say, you can never be too obvious. Although, as ever, the good moments in this, like any other movie, are the moments that are least obvious.
Like this one, for instance.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if we can... Yeah, we'll tell this. Now, I remember being astonished at what a nice, innocent guy Tony was, when months later he said to me, "My God, of course, it's a teenage girl playing with her box." Like it had never been a teenage girl playing with her box.
This was, I think, day 2 of production, if I'm not mistaken. It's very early on.
That's right, I remember you'd done this whole sequence and Dickie had cut it together for you fairly early, and it was really impressive. That this whole sequence is one of the standout directorial moments in the picture, I think. Dickie I mentioned then was Richard Marden, who was the editor who worked with Tony on the picture, a venerable institution of the British film industry, and somebody you got on very well with. I mean, you were happy to have a seasoned editor like that on your first picture, right?
Absolutely.
I remember that particular little beast.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it was furry.
And you're so fond of... Perhaps the listeners would be interested to know that despite Ashley's lack of enthusiasm for the horror genre, she is enormously fond of rats.
Oh,
she
yeah.
used to have pet rats. Several times you had pet rats. She'd breed them, feed them to her German Shepherd. Well, that bit was accidental, but...
Rodent affinity.
But you do love rats, right? I mean,
do.
dumpster rats. You'll think, oh, how cute.
Oh,
when you
yeah, no,
see-
actually the twitching headdress fellow in the hospital scene, Steve, our friend,
Yeah.
we went to downtown LA and went on like a rat quest. So they were all celebratory because there's plenty of food and things to do for rats downtown in Los Angeles, and we went and watched them. It was like Templeton from Charlotte's Web, swinging off the rafters and things. The rats, not us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a really great sequence, though. I mean, all the elements work together.
Right.
The score swells at the right places, the lighting is impeccable, the timing of the thing.
It's all done with, it's very simple, sort of old-fashioned effects, wind machines, mortar cannons is what they called, I guess, when they were shooting all that stuff out, debris. The walls are pulled apart by people, when it's wood on rollers, etc.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of inserts, a lot of second unit in the sequence to put it all together. Shots like that, I believe, was an insert.
But many of them pre-planned inserts. I mean, this was a very choreographed sequence.
I believe strongly in a strong second unit.
Uh-huh. And here is the grand entrance of the Black Pope of Hell.
It's very regal.
Very regal. Very papal. Actually, we should introduce the other Cenobites. Like we said earlier, Barbie Wilde in this movie is playing the female Cenobite. And Simon Bamford and Nick Vince are Butterball and Chatterer, respectively. They were, of course, nicknames for the characters, as, by the way, was Pinhead. In the first movie, the character that Doug plays was simply referred to as Lead Cenobite. And it was a crew member's joke, Pinhead, and it stuck.
Ha.
Oh, yeah, no, that's totally true.
No, you said that it stuck.
Oh, stuck, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is day one of production.
This is the first thing you shot?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Obviously, we have a manipulation of the box from underneath the set. I think this whole sequence is kind of interesting with its use of loud noises and quiet. I'm actually quite satisfied with the way that worked.
No, it's a standout sequence. Actually, one of the few lines of dialogue in that sequence, though I should point out to newcomer film buffs that, scriptwriters don't only write the dialogue, they can write scenes without lines for the characters. Tony came to my defense at a similar state the obvious moment. One of my first meetings with professional script executives, the line that Doug delivers to stop the other Cenobites taking Imogen, It is not hands that call us, it is desire. And in my very first Hollywood script conference, an executive, actually a very nice woman, said, well, what does that mean? I think he should just say, it's not her that's calling us, it's the other guy, or something like that. And, my jaw dropped. I mean, she didn't mean that should be the line, but she wanted it to be more obvious. And my jaw dropped because I thought, well, what do you say to these people? They're paying me. And Tony said, you have to be kidding. We keep lines like that. They're poetic. And that's when I decided I'd be his friend.
The matte painting you just saw of this carnival, the little trivia there's some cranes receding off into the distance, giving it a depth, and there's numbers on the cranes that actually match the numbers on the crane seen in the office scene when Jimmy Stewart is talking to, and I forget the actor, in Vertigo, the setup for the whole plot with the wife, where he's working in a shipyard. This particular sequence was actually written to occur much earlier in the film.
Right, there was a lot of restructuring went on post-production.
Yeah, the scene didn't work where it was, and we basically created this kind of strange funhouse moment for this part of the film.
Those weird greens and reds that played over Imogen's face, and earlier the blues and reds that Chenard and Julia had walked through, were some of the first things I saw that you shot. And I thought the whole movie was going to look like a Dario Argento picture when I saw that stuff, because those great saturated, suffused colors.
Now, I believe...
This is where the set wobbles.
We'll see the set, which everybody loves to point out. Huh. That happened there.
This is interesting. Well, I'm assuming that we are watching exactly the same cut that you'll be watching. This is a restored sequence that wasn't in the theatrical version, wasn't in the first few video releases. Showed up, I think, first on the Image Laserdisc, though it had always been in the Japanese theatrical print. But this is now yet another variant because we didn't have the head of the sequence, Tony, right? The sequence we saw in the Laserdisc release included Kirsty at the door, seeing the front door of the house.
Those are not my feet. I caught on from the first one with the maggots.
Right. No, our memories may be fading. We'll see how it goes. I don't remember where that sequence fit in.
No, I think the sequence is in the right place, but it seems to have been trimmed following its reinsertion.
It's possible.
Yeah, who knows?
Oh, Kirsty. We thought we'd lost you.
So sweet of you to come back.
How can it send us back, child? We're already here. And so are you.
And again, Ash, I assume working with actors in heavy prosthetics is the same thing as working with technicians throwing rain at a window. It's like you just see past that. You believe in those characters you're facing. You don't think, oh my God, it's Doug in a rubber mask.
Well, Doug believes in the character he's
Right.
playing so much too, and that helps.
Right, so if they project well to you.
Sure.
Right.
Well, it's dark. They're dark films. It's a dark place to go emotionally. It's not like playing a high comedy, although at times it feels like it is.
It's very, very close to high comedy.
But he is in his own hell, child, and quite unreachable.
I don't believe you!
But it's true. He is in his own hell, just as you are in yours.
And what about you?
We have no more surprises.
We've always been here.
But please, feel free. Explore. We have eternity to know your flesh.
I think it's interesting that you use the phrase high comedy because I think any heightened moments in whatever genre have similarities with others, and I think full-blown horror can often relate to high comedy. When I say full-blown horror, I mean stylized, supernatural, metaphysical horror as opposed to blood and guts. And certainly, by the way, in a very early draft of this movie, I think the sort of pre-first draft, possibly a draft that Tony didn't even see, I had, and I admit, overindulged my fondness for high comedy, and the odd couple here, Chennard and Julia, had engaged in very inferior Noel Coward-style repartee because they were just, they thought they were so cool what they were doing together. And there was a lot of very arch, would-be comic dialogue, which Chris Figg persuaded me to trim back a little.
I have such sights to show you.
And the scene we just saw of the three people in a tub with chains was not one of the visions I'd put in the script. That was something Tony needed to put in. Oh, well, perhaps we're not going to get any further comment on that. Now, this must be where we see the set wobble, in fact.
Oh, there it went. And again.
Masked with a sound effect.
You must have opened the box, Tiffany. You've got to close it. You know how the puzzle works. Get us out.
Look, we're alone in all of this. And we have to help each other. We have to help each other.
You look like Jennifer Beals in that shot, Ashley.
Yeah?
That whole 80s thing.
Yeah?
The big curls.
Oh yeah, either that or I can be in a heavy metal band.
Right. Or married to a guitarist in Bon Jovi or something like that.
Exactly.
This set was just basically a catwalk in the middle of a giant, not this is a matte painting, clearly. The set itself was just a catwalk with a painted cyc going around 270 degrees around. There's actually some of my favorite imagery of these matte paintings.
Oh, it's fantastic. It gives such a richness to these movies.
Yes, this was done in the day long before computers were used to generate this stuff.
The God that sent me back.
Cliff Colley, the guy you mentioned before, I mean, those are literally glass shots. He painted those things on glass in a time-honored tradition, is that right?
Right. And superimposing other elements. It's a little bit of stroboscopic backstory for Dr. Chennard.
For you freeze framers out there.
Help me, Doctor. Help my daughter. Can you help her?
But this is what you wanted. This is what you wanted to see. This is what you wanted to know. And here it is.
I had to argue, by the way, for the possibility of creating black light, which had been written to come out of Leviathan, the big inverted lament configuration in the middle there. And I think the black light looks great. Not that Tony thought it couldn't be done, but there were
in those
production
days,
voices raised telling me, what do you mean black light? Black light doesn't exist. We'll just have to do light.
In those days, I believed anything could be done.
Well, that's a sad comment. It implies that you no longer believe that.
Now you know.
Yeah, this stuff is...
I love that shot. Something about her hair blowing against that blue background while her deluded lover is cheese sliced into cenobitism. It's fabulous stuff.
Well, everybody wanted to know how you make a Cenobite.
So we showed them.
This is the way.
Now that's the front door to Ludovico Street.
No, it's built into the set. It is the front
Right,
door. But
yeah, but no, I was frightened that was the header of that sequence we'd seen earlier.
no, I think it must be.
This
no,
is
it's
when she
not.
goes in and meets who she believes to be Larry. Thinks she's going to meet Larry.
I want you to wait for me, but if I'm not back soon, real soon, I want you to get out, and I want you to get home.
Okay, well, this is, although quite beautiful and anecdotally, this set
Deadly.
actually caught on fire one day.
The whole thing just went up.
And you can imagine with all those candles that accidents were possible. I don't like any of this. I think the film kind of stops pretty dead in this area. And had I to do it over, I think I would have done all this drastically differently.
In terms of pacing or in terms of compositions?
I think in terms of all aspects of it, I suspect the problem here is we are trying to tie up loose ends from the first film.
Mm-hmm.
And the film really has gone off on its own direction with the Chenard, Tiffany, Julia tract, and in retrospect, had to do over again. May not have been so concerned about tying up the loose ends on the first one. The thrust of this going to hell to find Daddy was greatly hurt by the fact that the actor, Andy Robinson, kind of at the last moment, a deal could not be made to have him in the film. Then we were too far along to have to rewrite an entire script, but we had to solve the problems of him not being in. We came up with the best solution at the time, and one I find story-wise not satisfying. So I think all of this finding Daddy stuff just doesn't work. I think the film clips along pretty nicely until we enter this alternate world down here. And although I think the execution is fine, it's the I think the story has stopped and will, once that element is disposed of, the film picks up pace again. But there's this very dry section here, and I think there's a lot of visual panache in here trying to save it in a heroic and exciting manner, but I've never found it to work very well. It almost feels like to me, let's just try to dazzle them. It's the old saying, dazzle them with BS.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I feel about all this stuff.
What's the matter, Kirsty? It's only Frank. It's only Uncle Frank.
Oh, no.
Didn't you get my message? Oh, Kirsty.
Because by this time in the film, I just don't really care about Daddy.
The energy's moved to other areas, I agree. Although actually, despite having to write several drafts in which the Andy Robinson character was in hell, metaphysically speaking, I don't believe he would have been. So I actually prefer the fact that this is all a filthy trick by filthy Uncle Frank.
Right.
I mean, I'm not arguing with you in terms of how it works in the energy of the picture. But schematically and thematically, I was kind of relieved because what the hell would Larry have been doing in hell? He didn't do anything wrong, poor bastard. Yeah.
Right, but I also think that the Frank here without skin we don't really relate to because we didn't see him enough as a character in the first film, and he doesn't appear until very late into this one.
I agree. I think there are certain problems because of that. Having said that, I think the energy between Sean and Ashley in this scene is pretty good and pretty creepy in its own discreet way. In other words, if this sequence was stripped out of the movie, I think it has its own internal energy. I
Right.
think these guys are doing a great job here.
Well, yeah, as I say, there's a lot of energy put
Right.
forth to try to make it exciting and make it something. And unfortunately for me, it's a kind of almost about nothing at this point.
That line scared me so much when I read the script, Pete. I'm like, oh God, how am I supposed to say that? And ironically, that's the line that made the most sense in the whole movie to me.
When you were actually doing it?
When I was actually doing it, yeah.
Huh.
Besides the fact that the set caught on fire, but
Yeah, right.
besides the literal, yeah, it really did.
No, I think, I mean, like I say, while I might agree with some of what Tony's saying, I think this is one of your best scenes in the movie. How does it feel watching yourself 13 years later?
I just remember that it's ironic, Tony, because it all came together for me here, because this was the continuing storyline for my character. So all the Frank and the daddy and the
right,
everything, it resonated so deeply with me.
Right, but that resonates for you because of having
I'm in the
emotional
movie.
investment in both films.
Right,
So that the
as
audience
opposed
watching
to-
this film, I think that they're
Right.
kind of lost. I think if you
But in
look
true
at,
actress form, I don't care.
I think if you were to take the two films together and edit them into one film and throw the structure up in the air and be very non-linear with the story and do things like, throw out the idea, start the whole film on this scene, then go back into the original Hellraiser stuff and crisscross the two different stories into a completely new cut of the film, I think you'd have a very interesting single film.
Right.
But on its own, this tying up for me doesn't work.
Come here. You belong to me.
See, then you would understand that this is a revenge moment here, and although we know it from the story, I don't think it doesn't resonate here.
Nothing personal, babe.
Claire really enjoyed this scene, though, I remember.
That, unfortunately, that fire going up behind her severely burned her back.
Right.
As we recall.
Well, let's not freak the audience out. I mean, not severely.
Well, it was a pretty welting. It wasn't.
No, was the
flames,
welting?
Oh yeah, the flames didn't hit it, but it was the heat.
I remember the heat, and I remember it being very red afterwards.
Oh, yeah,
but
she's not scarred or anything.
No, exactly.
Well, I'd like to think so.
Sounds very dramatic, doesn't it?
Never able to show her back again on film. In fact, I think that's a good idea. Take these two films and cut them into one film. That would be fun.
Well, actually, the thing is, we shot all that Elliot Spencer stuff for Hellraiser 3. You could actually take all three of the movies, and you could either do it, as you say, with a very bizarre cross-cutting, achronological way of telling it, or you could start in 1914, then 1921, and end up...
the Hellraiser saga.
Yeah, like edit them together like The Godfathers, yeah. And then we could take the few good moments from Hellraiser 4 and start it in the 18th century if we wanted.
I hesitate.
This entire production was done in London, England, outside of London, in Ivor Heath, at Pinewood Studios. All of the post-production sound was done in the same location, and we did the sound mix at the Pinewood Studios sound department, which is done. They have a very, very fine resume of films, probably Lawrence of Arabia, etc. I believe were all done there. It was basically done in the old-fashioned way. It was all cut on film and magnetic film, and virtually no films are done that way any longer. The sound mix on the film took approximately 3.5 weeks, and the only thing that wasn't done there was the musical score. In the early days, to save money, these big scores were done non-union here in Los Angeles, but somehow the union got tipped off that the score was going to be done and showed up the day the score was going to be recorded, and then it wasn't. And we ended up doing the scoring in Munich, which is, or interestingly enough, years later I went to do a film of its own. It was a very good place to work. Okay, now thankfully we're back in our old story and on our sets that were more integral to this film, more generic to the story we're telling, and I think at this point, for me, the story kind of kicks back into gear. You know, I have to say, during various screenings at the time of the film, I would walk out of the screening room during all of that previous stuff, and then I'd come back in around here.
Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'm not entirely sure that Kirsty would be emotionally armed enough to help Tiffany out in Act 3 if she hadn't had that emotional, though heartbreaking, resolution of her own in the middle of Act 2. She can be lifted to become a kind of ersatz adult. Not that you don't look very adult, Ash. But it's like you never know the consequences, you never know the domino effects. Like, I understand what you're saying in terms of the pacing of the movie, but I don't know if Kirsty's ability to help in Act 3 would have seemed to have come out of nowhere, would have seemed to have been less realistic.
But I think had we been armed with the fact that we would not have had Andy Robinson in this film, there would have been...
Yeah, absolutely, there would have been a different way to tell the thing from the get-go, of course. Rory Fellows was the stop-motion guy that did these nice...
Yes, I believe so. This is all very old-fashioned front light, back light, stop-motion animation. Looks charming, but dated. See, and I think all this stuff just fits into our story. These guys are part of the story now.
No boxes. Such a shame.
No more delays.
They're just lit so beautifully, too. I think Robin really defined them.
This look.
Yeah.
Now, also, you notice that Chatterer looks different in this version. There was a sequence where Chatterer was modified that never quite came out, never worked, and the scene was omitted, and thus the Chatterer just seems to appear different.
Like he nips off to some beauty parlor in hell and has his face remade off screen whenever he feels like it, yeah. Well, there were whole sequences here that were omitted, not just like were in the script and not shot, but that Tony shot and then didn't make it into the movie. This coming back to Earth in Act 3 and then realizing that hell has come with you. Originally, we played and planned much slower and we thought more creepily. There was a famous sequence amongst fans, mainly because New World used a still from it on the back of the original video box, even though the sequence had never been in the theatrical version or indeed in the video version. But it was of Pinhead and the female Cenobite in surgical gowns. And, you know, I've said this before in interviews, but I would like to assure the fans that whatever you imagine that scene was, it was infinitely better and more gory than what we actually ended up with, which is why we decided not to put it in the movie.
It was incomplete, and what was shot was hideous.
Right.
And hideous in not a good way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, bad.
Embarrassing.
Not scary.
Not scary,
Right.
Laughable. But apparently it generated a nice enough still to put on the video box, although no one had bothered to ask whether the scene was in the movie, which it was not. It was unfortunately beyond our means to be able to make the scene look good.
I also, for the first time after this movie came out, realized how invested fans get in this stuff because I received hate mail. Fangoria magazine were kind enough to pass the hate mail on to me. People were outraged that the Chennard Cenobite could dispatch the original Cenobite so easily. But of course, they should bear in mind that the Cenobites had been spiritually weakened by Kirsty, Ashley showing them, reminding them of their humanity, whereas Chennard, who has just happily unembraced his humanity, is in full Cenobitic glory. I hasten to assure all true Pinhead fans out there that I too believe that in a smackdown contest between Pinhead and Chennard, Pinhead would win.
I agree. Plus, Kirsty kind of has a thing for Pinhead.
Right.
Do you remember what happened to Nick with these hooks?
Yes, there was...
Nick Vince, who plays the Chatterer, who we were talking about.
He was spinning around on this pole, and a hook actually flew into his mouth and lodged itself on the roof of his mouth.
Inches away from his brain, because there's the space between your upper palate and your brain.
Well, not in Nick's case, but... Just kidding, Nick.
That's where the hook...
Yeah, right.
When he changes into his cell. No, he was actually in the Cenobite costume, right? That's
yeah, because no one knew at first, because he was struggling.
Right, the little boy is not Nick Vince. Nick played the Chatterer.
This operation, and you girls will be my first patient.
Ah, that's lovely.
Although Chennard looks cool, you gotta say that.
And he let me go again, the second time, you know.
He loves you.
He does.
He's got a real thing for Kirsty, that weird old...
Well, obviously Kirsty has a daddy thing and is
Right.
drawn to Pinhead.
Yeah, the ultimate stern father.
Exactly. Daddy, I've been bad.
Yeah. Well, he would certainly know how to give you your medicine, young lady. So tell us about the slow-mo, Tone.
The camera's running fast.
Oh, that's the way round. Okay.
Was there something I'm forgetting?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah. A lot of light and a really quickly churning camera.
What is this thing? What does it do?
The emotional functionality of using it at that point was to lend even more energy to this when they have to speed up, or?
Well, to lend significance to the moment of
Right.
re-entering the pits.
How'd you decide on the shape?
That was something Tony and I came up with together. I did not have it invert into that shape in my first draft.
Diamond, yeah. In
We-
the original draft I read, it was a creature or some.
It was
like a.
It was
giant
a
jellyfish.
shapeless, shifting, almost Lovecraftian globule of huge, pustulant evil at the center of hell. When Tony and I were in London the first time we met, and
There's that black light.
yeah, we love it. And look what it does to people. It's fantastic. I can't remember the sequence, but I know we came up with that together, and we both knew it was much better than The Great Beast. Partly because it seems more a logical outgrowth of the orderedness of the Cenobites and their particular hell.
Tiffany, I see now. It's a puzzle, isn't it? It's a puzzle.
Also, now I recall in the music, the horns of hell, the deep horns you're hearing that are pulsating in there are actually spelling out God in Morse code.
Right.
That was Mr. Young who
felt the need to establish the presence of God.
That's
because
right. He came from a
well, he's a Christian. He's a practicing Christian.
Right, and he felt that there had to be a balance, and he
Right.
didn't feel it in the film, so he put it in the music.
And how are we feeling today? You have your whole lives behind you now. No anesthetic at hand.
In the actual Chenard floating sequences, there was an older stuntman called Bronco. Is that right? Plays
Right.
Chenard in the.
Well, what had happened is Ken did it originally on the first day of shooting. This was probably a 2 or 3 days worth of work, but he ended up with an injured neck.
Right.
And could not go on again. So we had to use double.
So we should have made that drill bit through his skull stronger then, shouldn't
Right.
we?
Didn't hold well enough.
Right. See, I think you're right, obviously, Tony, that stop motion stuff looks dated, but I think it also looks timeless because of that. I think with all horror movies, they get to be good when their timeliness is removed. They have the initial visceral appeal when they are timely upon their release, and then they go through a weird decades-long doldrums.
Right.
And then, as soon as the timeliness no longer matters, the underlying qualities can come out, and I think that sort of highly stylized, just like with your lighting and the other stuff, the more stylized moments of this movie are the moments that make it enduring such as it is, I think.
Well, as I say, it's charming. I recently have seen a lot of films where creatures are created all on the computer, and they all have a look, which I find not charming. For instance, Stuart Little, which I saw recently, to me was just not. It just felt like I was watching a Macintosh computer.
Right.
Is what it felt like, and it sort of bothered me where this stuff has a dated but more interesting look. But that just might be the generation that we're from.
Right.
Your case is closed, Tiffany. I'm afraid it's time.
That particular hand cut was probably one of the moments that people remembered the most, as I recall. Just that little slice of the hand.
It's so often the little things that upset people, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can relate directly to that. Most people probably can't relate to
Yeah.
being turned into
to
a
being
Cenobite.
truly buggered up the way Chennard was, yeah. That sort of floating penis from hell that's attached to Chennard's head, wonderful effect. When budget was no limit, i.e. on paper, was meant to proceed directly from the core of Leviathan's darkness to Chennard's head. But we couldn't actually ever show that.
Trust me.
Now, I don't know if most people got it when she says "trust me." It's
But
actually
it's my voice.
It's Ashley's voice.
Right.
Mhm. And my forehead's rather ill-fitting here as well.
Although we should point out for the 10% of people who don't understand, this is actually still... this is
It
not
is Claire.
Ashley in Claire's skin. It is Kirsty in Julia's skin. But only... I guess not in the next shot. The
No.
next shot but one does it become...
Yeah, this is all still Claire.
This is still Claire. And now...
Because Tony had
no,
me
wait.
smile. Wait, this is still Claire.
That's Claire, right.
As soon as it...
No, this is you.
No.
No,
No.
right.
That's me.
Yeah.
Tony has me smile. And then you guys broke
Yeah.
for lunch, and I was sitting there in that Caro syrup for an hour. I remember because there's nothing to evaporate, so it was very, very cold. Because it was Caro syrup and coffee.
And England. Let's not forget in winter.
And England in winter. And my Caro syrup soup.
Yeah, you're both native Californians.
Yeah.
So the English winters were particularly unpleasant
Nasty,
for you guys.
nasty.
Yeah.
Well, as you recall, I spent this entire production sick and going to the infirmary and
Right.
trying to...
Not as sick as you got on the next visit. Do you remember that terrible cold you got? Was that on post on this, or was that on something
that
else?
was something else, but that was just the flu.
You were totally laid up, yeah.
No, this was just weeks of having a cold.
You see, Kirsty putting on the skin of the mother and acting as an ersatz deliverer of the child there, I don't think would have been emotionally justified without the closure of the daddy subplot.
Right.
But we don't care about character and emotion, do we, Tone? It's just about pacing and visuals.
Exciting bits.
Exciting bits. Well, the fact remains that the standout sequences in this movie are the bravura choreographed sequences, like Tiffany opening the box the first time, that whole sequence that we've just been through with Chennard and the girls.
I was sticky.
You look sticky.
I was sticky, and it's sweet. The blood is sweet.
And you say you don't like horror movies. Now that's a quote.
The blood is sweet.
The blood is sweet. Come, Kirsty, the blood is sweet.
Didn't we shoot this twice?
We did. Did we?
I believe
We
so.
might have. I think there used to be there was dialogue here that...
Right, that's right.
That didn't...
What are you going to
feel-
do? Open a puzzle box shop? Something dumb. But there they go, off to their lesbian relationship
Well,
future.
I have seams up the back of my hose, I'm noticing, in very high shoes.
Yeah.
This is lovely.
Well,
pine
it was
wood.
an all-male crew, Ash. What can we tell you? It was all them cockneys. Here, can you get her in some seam stockings, mate? Nice legs on that one. Get some stockings on it.
Now, Ollie's in this one, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Here he is here.
Yay.
This is Oliver Parker, who went on to bigger things than playing
moving
playing
man.
second
Moving man.
delivery man. Ollie directed Othello and An Ideal Husband, and had also done a lot of acting and directing in the theatre. He was, interestingly, my replacement in Dog Company, the theatre company I'd mentioned earlier that Clive, Doug and I ran in the 70s. When I buggered off back home to form a rock and roll band, Ollie was the first non-Liverpudlian member of Dog Company. And the other big difference is that I was an incredibly bad actor and Ollie was an incredibly good one. That is not Doug in the Pinhead makeup, that is Jeff Portas.
What is your pleasure, sir?
And that's Little John. That's one of the sculptors, as Jeff Portas is from Image Animation, and so is Little John there. Interestingly, that ending was originally meant to be Julia herself rising from the mattress as Queen of Hell, because the theory when this series started, the theory between Clive Barker and Chris Figg, was that Julia would be the continuing character, would be the sort of female Freddy Krueger of this series, if indeed series it was going to be. And it was only after Hellraiser opened, I'd already written one draft of this with that ending, with Julia coming back. It was only after Hellraiser opened and the public took Pinhead to its heart that we realized it was going to be him that should be the continuing character. Claire Higgins also made it fairly clear that she did not want to be our Boris Karloff.
Which also is the lesson you can't knowingly create.
Right, exactly.
A villain. It inevitably it's somehow an accident because people took to Pinhead.
Yeah.
And
who had very little screen time in the first movie.
Right.
But New World very wisely slapped a big picture of him on the poster.
Right. Right, and that was done because of the preview screenings when audiences filled out cards and what did they most respond to?
Love the guy with nails in his face.
Nails in his face. That was cool.
Yeah.
So that became the image for the whole series, and now I guess it's up to number 5 now.
They've just completed number 5, yeah, which for the first time none of us had anything to do with. Obviously, these credits are all people who contributed significantly to the movie. We sit here arrogantly talking about this thing as if we did it all on our own, and without every name on this list, the movie would have been less than it is, such as it is.
I guess for me on this film, it was, in a sense, film school. Learned a tremendous amount from the crew, the people that I was working with, Robin Vidgen and Dave Worley and Richard Martin, Mike Buchanan, and honestly, it's not one of my favorite works, but it was a tremendous learning experience. And every time I see this film, which is infrequently, I would like to go back and remake it with the knowledge that I have today. But unfortunately, in life, we rarely get that opportunity.
Well, Hitchcock did it, made The Man Who Knew Too Much twice. Perhaps we should give it another 10 years and we'll remake it, Tone.
Right.
And Ash, you could play Julia.
Oh yeah. Bye.
Goodbye. Thanks for listening.